As a decade, the 2010s NBA will be remembered for two things: the rise of the three-point shot and the domination of LeBron James, who went to 8 straight finals, won 3 championships, and was the league's top scorer between the 2009-10 and 2018-19 seasons.
It's all part of the plan. It's all part of the plan.
How did he get all those points? By attacking the basket. Simply put, James was the best player in the world last decade, in part because he was both the NBA's most prolific interior scorer and its most efficient one, too.
I'm the best player in the world.
Basketball is a pretty simple game when you can get to the rim at will and finish at high rates. Well, that's James in a nutshell. He made over 4,400 buckets and converted nearly 70% of his attempts in this key close range area. That's nearly 15 percentage points better than the league average here. And it's thanks to his incredible blend of smarts, size, and speed.
LeBron James leaving a wake of panic behind.
Who was the least efficient volume shooter in the paint last decade? Ramon Sessions, who was quick enough and clever enough to get to the rack, but at just 6'3", 190, he didn't have the size or the strength to reliably finish all those drives.
Sessions airball.
Let's move over to the left block, the land of back-to-the-basket bigs. Nobody scored more points from this zone last decade than LaMarcus Aldridge, who sank over 1,000 buckets here while splitting time between Portland and San Antonio. Aldridge has a beautiful post-up portfolio, and he absolutely loves the left side of the mid-range.
Turnaround fadeaway by LaMarcus Aldridge, his signature shot.
Aldridge has got a world-class fadeaway, but if there was one big man with a better one, it was Dirk Nowitzki. Dirk was the most efficient volume scorer in this area, converting 48.4% of his shots here. More on him in a minute. DeMarcus Cousins was the least efficient volume shooter in this zone. Boogie hit just 35% of his shots over here, a mark well below the league average, and a figure that reveals that while Boogie was certainly a talented scorer last decade, his jumper wasn't as solid as the other great scoring bigs around the league. Let's move to the left elbow, where once again we see LaMarcus Aldridge leading the way with 942 made buckets in this area. We get more classic fadeaways, as well as face-up jumpers, pick and pop, and more from Aldridge in this zone. But as prolific as Aldridge is, he's not as accurate as the king of the elbow jumper, Chris Paul. Paul is one of the best mid-range shooters of the era, and near the elbows he blends volume and efficiency better than any guard in the league. CP3 converted a league best 49.7% of his jumpers from this area last decade. What makes him even more impressive here is that a vast majority of these shots came off the bounce.
The amazing Chris Paul.
Conversely, Luol Deng was the least accurate shooter in this zone last decade. Deng made a mere 34% of his shots from this area, despite taking hundreds and hundreds of attempts here. Moving over to the right elbow, nobody made more buckets over here than Chris Paul. We already talked about his accuracy on the left side, but he's also great on the right side. Paul made 865 buckets in the zone during the 2010s. He has a solid case to be the best mid-range shooting point guard ever.
Cold-blooded basket by Chris Paul!
But if it's not Paul, it's this dude. Steve Nash was simply an elite shooter. And even at the tail end of his career, Nash was still freakishly accurate as a jump shooter. He made a ridiculous 51.5% of his shots from the right elbow last decade, making him the most accurate shooter here.
Here's Nash. Follow-away jump shot is pure.
Speaking of accuracy and efficiency, Josh Smith was never really known for either, folks. Throughout his career, Smith was a stubbornly active and woeful jump shooter. The southpaw made just 31.4% of hundreds of shots from here. Let's move to the last mid-range area, the zone along the right baseline. Nobody made more shots from here in the 2010s than Carmelo Anthony. The jab steps, the pull-ups, the turnarounds. The full arsenal was in effect from the 2012-13 scoring champion right here in this zone.
Carmelo Anthony hits that deadly baseline jump shot.
Who was the most efficient though? Dirk again. The best shooting big man ever. Made 49% of his shots over here, many coming via his patented and unstoppable one-legged fadeaway. Nowitzki's high release in his fadeaway allowed him to shoot anytime against anyone, and he did.
Fall away. Basket. Nowitzki.
Andrew Wiggins is no Dirk Nowitzki. Wiggins was the least efficient volume shooter in this zone last decade. The former #1 pick has yet to develop anything resembling a reliable jumper, and these numbers prove it. Let's move beyond the arc, where different kinds of scorers thrive. Three-point shooting exploded in the 2010s, thanks in large part to a cohort of sharpshooters that took over the league. It seems like every player in the league can shoot threes now.
From your 7-foot center.
Nobody made more left corner threes, though, than Wesley Matthews, who sunk 323 of them last decade. His signature celebration mimics an archer firing an arrow, an appropriate look for a guy who hits the bullseye a lot. Matthews may have hit the bullseye a lot from the left corner, but he didn't do it as reliably as Kyle Korver. Korver may be the greatest catch-and-shoot three-point shooter ever. He's that good, and he made over half of his left corner threes in the 2010s. You're not supposed to shoot over 50% from downtown, but that's just the kind of stat that makes Korver so special.
Kyle Korver, the triple.
Corey Brewer is on the other end of the spectrum. Corner threes are supposed to be among the most efficient shots on the floor, but they're not when Brewer shot them. He made just 30.7% of hundreds of attempts from this corner.
Corey Brewer, wide open three, couldn't get it to go.
As we move above the break, the stars come out. Even though LeBron James was the leading scorer of the 2010s, Stephen Curry was arguably the decade's most definitive scorer. He's particularly dangerous on the wings. On the left wing, Curry was both the most prolific and most efficient shooter of the decade. Curry became the first player to win scoring titles, MVPs, not to mention a couple of titles, by terrorizing opponents from downtown.
He is sensational.
Who was the least efficient over here? The answer might surprise you. Kobe Bryant made just 29.6% of hundreds of shots in this area during the 2010s. Now, Bryant was undeniably one of the most gifted shooters and scorers we've ever seen. However, near the tail end of his incredible career, some of his efficiency numbers were just no good, including his conversion rate in this zone. Let's move to the top of the arc. Anyone who's watched the Rockets game in the last few years has seen James Harden break down defenders and launch his signature step-back three. Harden's signature weapon made him the leading scorer up here during the 2010s.
Harden, step back, puts it in. James Harden drills the three-pointer.
But when we look at efficiency, we see a familiar name. Kyle Korver hit 44.5% of his top-of-the-arc threes in the decade. One reason Korver's more efficient than Harden, though? Almost all of his threes are of the catch-and-shoot variety, whereas most of Harden's are off the bounce. Regardless, along with the Splash Brothers, Korver was among the scariest marksmen in the league last decade.
Kyle Korver for three more.
Speaking of scary, Russell Westbrook's three-pointers. Brody made just 29.5% of his top-of-the-arc threes in the 2010s, making him the least efficient volume shooter in this zone. Thunder fans might miss Westbrook's crazy energy and his ferocious dunks, but they don't miss his stubborn insistence on shooting triples at the wrong moments. As we move to the right wing area, Westbrook again is the least efficient shooter. He made less than 30% of his shots over here as well. Now, there's no denying that Westbrook was one of the most explosive offensive players of the decade, but he also struggled to channel that energy into smart shot selection all decade long, and these numbers just prove that.
Three, Westbrook, way off.
You know who doesn't have a jump shooting problem? Stephen Curry, who was both the leading scorer and the most efficient volume shooter in this zone last decade. Yep, Curry led the NBA in buckets and efficiency from both wings in the 2010s.
Another dazzling display of long-distance shooting.
Let's wrap this up over in the right corner. Nobody made more buckets over here than Trevor Ariza, who sank 375 of them. Ariza is a quintessential 3-and-D guy who was the perfect fit next to Harden in Houston's three-happy ecosystem. Harden's abilities to attract defenders and find the open man are the backstory behind Ariza's corner domination. Speaking of 3-and-D guys, Bruce Bowen and the Spurs made the corner three famous in the 2000s, but they kept it going strong in the 2010s. Danny Green led all shooters in efficiency from this corner, hitting 45% of his tries. And if Ray Allen doesn't hit the most famous right corner three of all time in 2013, Green might have been named Finals MVP if the Spurs won that series. Like Ariza, Green is a perfect off-ball complement to teammates like Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, or Manu Ginobili, who command defensive attention and open up the corners. When it comes to 3-and-D players, they really are supposed to do two things: make threes and play defense. Well, Corey Brewer can play D, but he was the least efficient volume shooter in this corner too. Brewer's NBA career was cut short in part because he just couldn't develop a reliable corner three to go along with his defense. Folks, the 2010s were incredible, thanks in large part to the performances of players like Curry and Harden and the ridiculous numbers they amassed from downtown. The best shooters of the 2010s led a shooting revolution that changed pro basketball forever.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.